Welcome everyone who's joining. Thank you so much for being here for the Climate Pro Bono Bootcamp. My name is Matthew Karmel. I am the chair of the Environmental and Sustainability Law Group at Offit Kurman, a full-service AmLaw 200 law firm. My group does a lot of things, but for the sake of the moment, we'll skip some of that. I'm also the founder of the Planetary Lawyer Project, which is a newsletter for lawyers who want to do more for the planet, including biweekly newsletter, curated job openings, pro bono opportunities, interviews with industry leaders, and events like this. So we're very excited to be putting on this event for you. There are over 400 people registered for today, and I see we're climbing towards 200 live participants. So thank you for that. The Planetary Lawyer Project, as I mentioned, is a newsletter that provides resources. I'm going to put a link in the chat right now for everyone who is interested in the newsletter. We'll be sharing a couple different links as we go through today. But if you're not already subscribed to the newsletter, please do so to find out about future events like this. My slides are going a little slowly. Bear with me for a second. So this event is presented by the Planetary Lawyer Project, Offit Kurman, my law firm, and also Green Pro Bono. I want to take a minute to talk about Green Pro Bono for a second because they're a big reason why this is happening. Green Pro Bono is a nonprofit organization that matches climate-friendly companies, startups, causes that need pro bono assistance with lawyers that can provide that assistance. They're a wonderful organization. We're going to talk a lot about them later in this presentation, but two links I'm going to put in the chat right now. One is the way to get involved with their services, and then the second is the donation link. Nonprofit, it runs solely on donations. This is a free event for everyone today, but we all know that CLE events like this cost a lot of money. So we ask that you consider providing whatever donation you're able to in order to support the mission of Green Pro Bono. We also have two fantastic sponsors for the event. The Go In-House website and network is a job board and community for in-house counsel positions. It is one of the sole dedicated places for legal in-house positions, and it is a fantastic resource. I know I use it on a weekly basis to source climate-friendly jobs for the Planetary Lawyer Project community. And the Green Jobs Network is another fantastic organization that pulls together it's founded in 2008. The Green Jobs Network is dedicated to helping bring job seekers who are interested in environmental and social responsibility to find jobs, career resources, and build their professional networks. It's a community of over 150,000 people, and there are legal jobs and resources associated with it. And we'll be hearing more from the founder of the Green Jobs Network a little bit later in this. Covering a little bit more of the housekeeping. Here are the faculty that you'll be hearing from over the next couple of days. We've put together, a very esteemed list of panelists, and we're very excited and pleased that they're willing to volunteer their time for this. The agenda you can find on our website. The registration link for day 2, you do have to register separately for day 2, and that has already been put in the chat, but we'll put that in again just so that people know where that is. And then a few things before we get started. How can you obtain CLE for participating in this event? You have to attend a whole session, a whole 2-hour block. Since there's 2 days, you have to attend a whole day. You can get credit for one day as opposed to both days. You can get credit for both days, but you do have to attend the whole day. We'll be announcing CLE codes throughout the presentation. Write them down. And then at the end of the day, we will also be sharing a form, which you will have to submit to us by Friday, January 19th, close of business, in order to receive CLE credit. It has been approved for CLE credit in California, Georgia, Delaware, Pennsylvania, and Illinois, and credit is available in many other states through approved jurisdiction policies. For instance, New Jersey and New York have approved jurisdiction policies that make this, available for credit there. Other states, you'll have to check with your bar association to find out. How can you ask questions during the event? There is a Q&A function, and we will be answering questions through the Q&A function throughout and at designated times. Will the recording be made available? Yes. Everyone who's registered now will receive a copy of the recording of this event. How can you donate to Green Pro Bono? I think we've covered that already. And then the most important question, actually, is what is the case for climate pro bono? We're all 204 of us here to talk about the case for climate pro bono. But what is it? And to get us started there is Leonard Adler, who is the founder of the Green Jobs Network and a tremendous leader in the environmental sustainability field, a former lawyer, but he is going to talk to us about his perspective on the case for climate pro bono.
Great. Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Matt. I'm going to just get the slides up and we'll get going. Great. So again, Matt, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you to everyone who's here with us today. Really appreciate it. And I'm very excited and happy to be with you. So let's get started. This is going to be very brief, and you can think of this as part of really the introduction for the day. And really, it's to help answer the question, why do climate pro bono? And there's really going to be three things going to touch on. I'm going to give you a quick intro, just to learn a little bit more about where I'm coming from so you know my perspective. And then the case for climate pro bono. And then going to give you an example as someone who's actually received climate pro bono services. So briefly, a little bit about myself, just so you know where I'm coming from. So I actually grew up in a low-income environment in New York. I was fortunate to go to Stanford for college. And while at college, I began to really take some classes and really understand issues that I'd seen growing up in a broader perspective, and decided I really wanted to use the opportunity I'd been given to really make an impact and address a variety of social issues, economic issues, and other ones. And so that really led me to get a master's in public policy at Harvard's Kennedy School. And that led me also to get a law degree at Georgetown. And one of the things I did there, I was the co-founder of the Georgetown Journal on Poverty Law and Policy, which is still being published decades after me and fellow students had started it. So in the context of the work that I do, just want to keep that in mind, and I'll touch upon that more in a moment. There's other things I've done within the broader public interest and public service law space. I've had an opportunity to work for Equal Justice Works, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And then specifically for what we're talking about here over the next day or two, I founded Green Jobs Network in 2008 with a mission to connect people to jobs, career resources, and community. And there are things specifically to the legal space. There's a specialty website where you can find, legal jobs and other legal resources. And Matt is doing a tremendous job with the things he's been doing at the Planetary Law Legal Project. So in the context of what I do, in the context of climate, for me, it's in addition to obviously tackling very significant environmental and sustainability issues, it's important for me to do what I can to ensure that the opportunities that are available through this, because there's tremendous economic opportunities that are available, those are dispersed as widely and as equitably as possible. So in my work, to be able to help people find jobs, going back to what I was talking about, addressing poverty issues, that's part of what animates some of the work that I do today. So in terms of the case for climate pro bono, there's 3 points here that we're going to touch upon. One I call meeting the moment. And we're going to talk about the benefits of doing climate pro bono, and then briefly just want to encourage people to reflect as you engage in this work. And so by meeting the moment, what do I mean about meeting the moment? And there's just only a couple of slides here. Really, I've been doing this work for 15 years, and what I can confidently say is this is the best time to get involved in this. If you haven't done things in this space, this is really the best time. We've entered, in my view, an inflection point over the past few years where things are no longer kind of a niche or a side thing. This is a very, very active and growing field. So really, regardless of your topical interest, your legal skill set, you're going to be able to find things, and really the way I can summarize it is that there's a place for you in this space, and that you are needed now more than ever before. And in terms of meeting the moment, I think there's a lot of information that I'm sure either you have already heard about and you may see here regarding, the warming of the planet. And what I actually want to touch upon are just a couple of quick stats that focus more about what I would describe as the opportunity and looking at things from a kind of a macro perspective around trends. And so when I talk about meeting the moment, why I think your timing, they say timing is everything, why your timing for participating in this is really perfect right now. So just a couple of things. So this chart shows, global sales of electric vehicles. And when I started doing this work, if you look to the far left of the slide, there really weren't any electric vehicles being produced. And now, as you can see, it's growing and growing and growing, and projections obviously are for the continued growth. So as compared to when I started doing this work to when I talk to people now, I say now it is a great time to be involved in this space. And just another quick illustration of this, if you look at solar energy, and this is just the United States, when I started doing this work, you look back to the left, really almost nominal. And now, again, as I think we all know, solar is clearly an increasing part of our domestic energy sources. So when I describe macro trends meeting the moment, again, you are at the right place and right time. And I think you're in the right event as well in terms of the great speaker lineup that you have coming up. And then briefly, just a couple of things to speak about the benefits. I think if we did like a crowdsourced, put ideas for what the benefits you think you'd get out of doing Climate Pro Bono in the chat, I'm sure we'd have a ton of really great answers. So I'm just going to give you a few from my perspective about the benefits and really the core around professional development. So first is it gives you an opportunity to learn. If you are interested in learning more about climate, sustainability, and environment, doing Climate Pro Bono is, in my view, a great way to do that. If you want to hone your skills, again, it's a great way to do that. I occasionally speak to people who want to do what you might think of a career transition into the space. If that's something you're thinking about, again, doing Climate Pro Bono is a great way to do that. It lets you explore the field. It lets you demonstrate expertise and experience in the field if there's something you want to transition into. A few other benefits is the ability to connect, build your professional network in the space. It's really a great opportunity, and there's amazing people. Again, you're going to see a lot of them over the course of these couple days. So from a networking standpoint, doing Climate Pro Bono is really an excellent way to do that. And then I think it goes without saying, an opportunity to do not only interesting work, but impactful work. Again, these are some of the most important issues of our time. And so doing Climate Pro Bono is a way you can get involved in that. The last point around making the case, I just shared a few different kind of, reasons to do it and benefits. I think it's helpful before engaging in something to think about what are your own personal reasons and motivations? What are you hoping to get out of it? And I think by being conscious of that also lets you potentially engage with whether it's a potential client or others you may meet in the context of this 2-day session, and just kind of share kind of where you're coming from. Find out, hey, how do your expectations line up with what the opportunities are, and kind of work through that process. So always encourage you to reflect before kind of engaging in something new. And then really the last thing to share is from the perspective of someone who's received Climate Pro Bono services. And so I'm actually involved with an organization that's starting out. It's called CUSP, Consortium for University Alumni for a Sustainable Planet. And it's really grown organically out of individual alumni groups, Harvard Alumni for Climate and the Environment, Stanford Alumni for Sustainability. I'm involved with some of those groups. There's groups like that are happening at different universities. They're doing great work. They realize that there's a strength in coming together and creating a new nonprofit organization to help organizations connect with each other, share best practices, and potentially help nurture new organizations like this at other universities. So as we've been getting started very fledgling, the call kind of came out, we could really benefit from legal services to help us in core corporate formation work, get us started, potentially 501c3 process. And so we actually reached out to Matt, and he's kind enough to be working with us through that process. And I can tell you, as someone who's, who's at CUSP at the meetings, people there, pretty much each meeting, they expressed, tremendous gratitude, tremendous appreciation. And Matt's not in the room, so he can't hear this, so I can just tell him here, it means so much to have someone with legal expertise guide people who don't have that through these questions, and to be able to make smart decisions to lay the foundation for hopefully an organization that's going to be around for a long time. And so again, if you think about another benefit, potentially working in Climate Pro Bono gives you a chance to, I mentioned impactful work, potentially even leave a legacy. This organization, is around for 10, 20 years or more. Providing those legal services at the right place, right time is really something that can have a lasting impact. So I just want to conclude with that. And I'm really, again, thank you for your time. And I know you're going to have a great couple days.
Yeah, thank you so much, Leonard. Thank you for those comments. You really tremendously appreciate it. It's an honor to get to work with you on that. But so I'm going to talk a little bit of a personal story of sort of some of the pieces that Leonard touched on. Um, so why are we doing this event? And why am I hosting this event with the other partners? Why is this event important to me? And so I'll take the personal aspect of that first. Why is this important to me? And the answer is I have used climate pro bono to build a career for myself in private practice as one of many things. My first client as a junior associate was a pro bono client. I woke up one morning and said, I want to have control of my practice. I want to do something meaningful and rewarding. How do I do that? And after some clarification, I came up with the idea of, well, if no one's going to hire me to pay me any money, let me just go out into the market and find someone who I can give my services to for free. And we're lucky in the legal industry to have an industry that recognizes and appreciates that concept through pro bono in a very sort of formal way. Because otherwise, it can be pretty weird to go out on the street and just offer your services for free. um, but so I started with a single pro bono project, single climate related pro bono project, um, and built certain skills. I'll talk a little bit more in a case study about this exact project. And I have been hired to use those skills on multiple occasions. That exact specific skill set, the exact connections that I made, all of those things, including by a large private equity firm, a mid-sized company with revenue of a couple million a year. Large companies have come to me exactly as a result of that. So I can trace exact aspects of my practice to that effort. And I'm not stopped. Um, it's many years since that first project and many pro bono clients. And I find them incredibly personally rewarding. And at the same time, without fail, they support my career. It's because I'm using it intentionally and I'm engaged in it. But there's a couple sort of tips that I want to give for someone who wants to use this for maximum climate impact and maximum career impact. And the first is think more broadly about climate, right? We hear climate and sometimes we think very narrow things. We think environmental and social governance, we think greenhouse gas reporting, we think things like that. But my first project was representing community composters. My second climate related project was a minority beekeeping association. My third was, a tax credit issue in the energy industry for a nonprofit organization. There's a whole lot of things, and finding climate pro bono can often be one of the hardest steps. Green Pro Bono is an excellent resource for that because they send out emails regularly with postings, with opportunities. Help this company, help that company. It's a great place to go. If you don't go there, you want to go into your community, right? You want to go to the nonprofits that are in your area. You want to go to the companies that are inspiring you in your area. You want to go to the trade associations in your area. You want to make those local connections because I can assure you that people in your network need legal assistance to do things. Just like the example that Leonard gave of CUSP, right? That opportunity was available because Leonard and I had a connection. He was in my network and community and knew that I was looking to offer these types of things. And I'm able to offer at a specific point in time, that service. The other thing to think of is it is incredibly important to do the everyday pro bono, right? There are clinics, there are different things like that where you're just providing, change in, change out, everyday pro bono. I kind of think of it like, people who need representation, landlord tenant pro bono, domestic violence pro bono, those kinds of things. And there aren't analogies in climate law, these kinds of repeat aspects. And it's very critical to do those things. We need soldiers, we need people doing that work on an everyday basis. And corporate formation is one of the things in the climate space. But the other thing is, I want people to think big about climate pro bono. And this is harder, and these projects come around less. But I want you to think about the narrative that your climate pro bono is telling. I want you to think about what connections you can make through it. I want you to draw a constellation that is how the climate pro bono that you're doing fits in with your career and can move it forward. And this may sound self-serving to some of you that I'm saying, make sure climate pro bono works for your career. But the more it works for your career, the more you will be able to do. I know that I have complete license and have had for a long time at prior firms where I was an associate, because it was clear how my pro bono work impacted my career. And I was able to do as much as I really wanted to. And then I think the last thing I want to leave you with on this is, why are we hosting this event? And the answer is, at the general level, is that there are a lot of skills that are needed to do climate-related pro bono work. But they're often not unique to climate pro bono. Corporate formation, intellectual property, labor and employment, renewable energy work. Some of those things are unique to climate pro bono. Some of them are not. Most of them are not. And there are plenty of CLEs out there on all of those topics. But we noticed a gap, right, where someone wants to do climate pro bono, but they don't have the exact skill, or they're not confident enough. And so the idea of this is to jumpstart your pro bono journey by giving you some skills that clients already need, right? You could go out and find a pro bono client tomorrow that needed corporate formation assistance, and it's not something you do every day. There are plenty of articles and CLEs that you can read. I want to encourage you to do that. And this is your first step, right? This is the first action item in becoming skilled to help whatever climate pro bono in the ways that you can. And I encourage all of you to use the skills that you have, because we all have a tremendous amount of skills, but also to not be afraid to do something outside of your comfort zone with the resources that are available, including this webinar. I know that I have done that, and it's been incredibly rewarding. I am not a corporate lawyer, but as Leonard has said, I'm helping him with one of my colleagues on corporate formation. I've helped with founders agreements. I've helped with other pieces, all things outside of my comfort zone, because I do the homework to do that stuff. And it's all been incredibly, incredibly rewarding to me. As I noted, Green Pro Bono is one of my favorite places to find these projects. And before Green Pro Bono found me, I was spending a lot of time crowdsourcing pro bono opportunities. And so I'm very excited to be hosting this event with Green Pro Bono, and with Stephanie Demetry, who is the executive director of Green Pro Bono, and is now going to tell us a little bit more about Green Pro Bono and its initiatives.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I am so excited to be joining today, as is the rest of the Green Pro Bono team. And we're very happy to be able to provide a practical tie-in for this program by telling everyone a little bit more about our organization and how to get involved with climate pro bono projects once the bootcamp is over. I'll start out by just giving everyone some background. As Matt mentioned in the beginning, Green Pro Bono is a legal services nonprofit that matches climate-friendly social enterprises and nonprofits with pro bono legal assistance. Our mission has been to wield the power of the law and pro bono legal services in particular to expedite the innovations needed to combat climate change. We started out in 2010 as a small group of volunteer lawyers with the goal of empowering all attorneys, even those who aren't engaged in a traditionally environmental practice area, to use their skill sets to impact climate change. And also, there were very few pro bono opportunities in the climate space at that time. There continue to be very few opportunities, but we are one of the organizations aiming to help with that. And the main way that we help with that is our sort of core programming, our pro bono matching program. The service we provide, we like to think is pretty simple and friendly. We send out climate pro bono opportunities about once a week. Prior to distributing them, each opportunity has been thoroughly vetted by the Green Pro Bono team. We are a team of lawyers, so we try to make sure that every request we send out is feasible and the clients are at the right stage to engage. And in addition to providing these opportunities, we provide a little bit of relationship management to make the process simpler. So once an attorney or a firm expresses interest in a case request, we help to sort of manage the attorney-client relationship at the outset through the matching process by facilitating an introductory handoff meeting, and then we remain available throughout the representation for questions and assistance that may be needed. Our goal is really to make engaging with Green Pro Bono as simple as possible for the network. So before I get into the specifics of how to get involved, I also wanted to give a brief sense of the impact that our volunteer lawyers and our clients have had over the past 13 years. To understand our impact is also to understand how we select our clients and what the criteria we have is. We keep it pretty broad, and that's for a reason. We really want to be able to offer our services to any client who can clearly articulate their environmental impact or their tie to sustainability into their mission. So if they're able to do that throughout our intake process, then we will work with them and distribute them out to the network. And at that point, it's on the attorneys to decide what's interesting to them. This has allowed us to work with everything from really small scale community-led resiliency projects to more globally focused climate tech startups. And it just means that our distributions are always unique, always exciting, and always providing different opportunities for the network. So just to provide a few examples of the type of clients that you might see if you sign up for a distribution, I have recently worked with clients involved in renewable energy, reforestation, urban farming, environmental education, sustainability consulting, food waste reduction, indigenous land stewardship, land and animal conservation efforts, sustainable medical and hygiene products, climate change documentarians, and many, many more. That's all just to say that because of our broad criteria, we're able to work with clients from a very large cross-section of industries and always keep our opportunities exciting. So this brings me finally to how to get involved. Matt already sort of mentioned at the outset, and I think it may already be in the chat, but we want to make this as easy as possible for you. So the way that we recruit lawyers and add people to our network is a very simple distribution process. We have a short survey that you can fill out on our website, and as soon as you do that, you'll be added to the network. It's pretty simple. Let me just check and see. Matt, is that already in the...
I just put them in again. Both the donation link and the volunteer link are now top of the chat.
Perfect. So my last plug, Matt kind of already touched on this, but if you take a look at our agenda for the next few days, you'll see a session for most of the areas that Green Pro Bono works in: entity formation, tax, intellectual property, regulatory concerns. Those kind of make up the core of our case requests. So it's not really the traditional environmental pro bono that you might be thinking of, but it's all for organizations that are working towards fighting against climate change. So even if you don't feel ready to maybe take on a project by yourself after this, after all of these sessions are over, I would still encourage you to sign up for the distribution. If nothing else, you'll be exposed to a huge variety of climate-friendly organizations that you otherwise wouldn't have heard of. And it can just be a very helpful thing to channel your frustrations about climate change into something more productive, to be able to see these inspiring organizations and the work that they're doing, and maybe aspire to take on a project in the future. So please sign up at the link if this sounds interesting. We really hope that you'll join us on our mission. And that is all that I have on Green Pro Bono logistics, Matt, and background for now. But if we have a few minutes left, happy to open it up to questions or
Yeah,
whatever
we can
you
take, we don't see anything in the Q&A. If people have questions, please put them in the Q&A. If someone has a question, drop it in the Q&A and we'll get to it right now. I am going to drop the CLE form in the chat right now and tell you that the first code for the day is volunteer. Not surprising. We encourage you to volunteer. So with that, Stephanie will be around, and so we can circle back on questions if anything comes up. But we are going to pivot right into our first substantive panel of the day, where we have Joshua Kim and Insung Kim from Dechert, who are two really excellent supporters of green pro bono. So we're very excited to have them here. Joshua Kim is an associate in Dechert's corporate and securities group and has some experience with tax specifically. And Insung Kim is another member of the global tax group and focuses on domestic as well as cross-border mergers and acquisitions. And we're very excited to have them here, specifically to drive home, I think, the point that Stephanie was talking about is so much climate pro bono is not quote unquote environmental. There's so many corporate needs. And so with that, Josh and Insung, we're so excited to have you here, and we'll hand it off to you.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Leonard. Thank you, Stephanie, for organizing this event, and we're excited to be here. And thank you for having us. I'll put up the slides. Just 1 second. Okay.
I can't see your slides yet.
Is this working now?
Yes, I see them.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. I didn't practice putting up the slides. Again, my name is Josh Kim. I am a corporate associate at Dechert. Here today, I'm here with my colleague Insung. Insung, if you want to briefly.
I'm Insung Kim. I'm a tax associate at Dechert. We're not brothers, by the way.
So today we'll discuss some frequently asked questions regarding entity formation. These are some questions that you'll get from pro bono clients that you'll get paired up with an organization like Green Pro Bono, or at least some of the questions that you'll need to ask yourself so that you can make effective advice to pro bono clients. Before we delve into the details, I wanted to briefly talk about the new law that came into effect this year, January 1st of 2024. The Corporate Transparency Act adds new reporting requirements designed to prevent the misuse of legal entities for illegal purposes. In beginning January 1st, 2024, reporting companies must disclose their beneficial owners to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network of the U.S. Department of the Treasury. The reporting companies is broadly defined to include corporations, limited liability companies, and other companies that's formed in the U.S. or formed in foreign jurisdictions that are authorized to do business in the U.S. So it's basically all entities. I mean, there are some exceptions, and I highly encourage you to read the law and get familiarized with the exceptions. But the chances are that your clients, whether they're for profit or pro bono, they're likely to be obligated by this new law to make disclosure requirements. And if there's one takeaway from this presentation that I would like to impress upon you is, for junior associates, please familiarize yourself with the new law and follow your firm's policy. There may have been some updates to who is authorized to form an entity and who is authorized to prepare these disclosure reports. So please speak with your internal teams before forming an entity. And for in-house counsel, please discuss with a management team and have this on their radar. There are a lot of resources out there. A lot of law firms have prepared articles on this new law and the impact that's going to have on these existing companies. But if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to any of your external counsel. Just wanted to add that for existing entities that were formed previous to 2024, the reporting requirements begin in January 1st of 2025. All right, so you get paired up with a client. The first step is obviously to schedule a call with them and just kind of have a discussion with them about what they're looking for, what their business model is, what kind of entity they're looking to form, and things of that nature. So you're going to get that question, what structure is best for my business? Or at least you're going to have to think about what structure is best for a client's business. So we're going to, in the next slide, we're going to go through some of the considerations that you're going to need to keep in mind. So here are some high-level considerations. Obviously, you're going to want to consider the ownership structure of the entity, the governance, the desired level of formality, the business model, and tax considerations. Comparing the two most common types, LLCs and corporations, I think there's a perception that corporations are expected to be more formal. In practice, I don't think that's necessarily true. I've seen LLCs as complex as corporations when it comes to voting rights, and corporations as relaxed as LLCs. I think this common perception stems from the fact that most of the public companies that we see in the headlines, with the ones that have the board fights, the annual meetings, the proxy fights, they're all corporations. So I think that's where the idea is coming from. But from our perspective, when we advise pro bono clients, I think it really boils down to how the pro bono client wants to be perceived as. Is it going to be an LLC or corporation, and really the tax portion of it. So for the tax consideration, I'll hand it over to my colleague Insung.
So on tax considerations, I'll get into the details of each entity later in the presentation. But at a high level, generally there are pass-through entities versus a C Corp. And pass-through entities are disregard entities, partnerships, and S corporations. And they're generally subject to one layer of tax. Pass-through meaning all the income and loss that you're earning through the entity passes through to the owners. Whereas C Corps are subject to two levels of tax. They're subject to tax at the entity level, and any distribution from that C Corp is subject to another tax at the shareholder level as dividends. Nonprofits are not subject to tax, generally speaking, but they're subject to a lot of different requirements. On broad strokes, they can be divided to public charities, which are generally supported by the public, and private foundations that are generally supported by a single or a few individuals, like the Gates Foundation, for instance. But as I noted, I'll get into the details later.
In addition to LLCs, corporations, partnerships, nonprofit organizations, sometimes you're going to hear from clients or just from Google searches, you'll see what's called certified B corporations and benefit corporations. Certified B corporations, or colloquially B Corps, they're a designation. So for example, I would have an entity and I would take what's called the B impact assessment from a nonprofit called B Lab. And once I get the passing score of 80 out of 200, I would get this nice logo that I can use for my marketing materials, my email signature, and things of that nature. recertification is needed every 2 years. And this is encouraged for people who are interested, entities who are interested in ESG matters and ESG impact, because it encourages increased transparency and accountability. Now, related but separate from B Corp is what's called benefit corporation. Benefit corporation is a legal business structure, just like an LLC or a corporation. So you would either incorporate as a benefit corporation, or you would amend the existing governing documents to convert into a benefit corporation. There's no assessment or certification needed, but a lot of states that have this legal entity business structure, they require reporting. So that's something to keep in mind for when advising clients. Traditional corporations, they focus on shareholders and maximizing profit, whereas the benefit corporations, their focus is on having an impact on all stakeholders, not just the shareholders, but also employees, community, and the environment. You may ask a question, why do we then have benefit corporation as a separate category legal entity type when, why doesn't the board just make decisions about decisions that's beneficial for all stakeholders? That's because in most states, including Delaware, the charters cannot conflict with the law. And the current law requires that in Delaware, directors shall act in the best interest of the shareholders. So benefit corporations, this concept kind of provides a carve out and provides a unique protection for the board to act in the best interest of all shareholders rather than just shareholders and maximizing profit. I haven't had the fortune to work with a company that has that is the benefit corporation. I've seen some certified B corporations, but in practice for pro bono clients that are just looking to set up a new entity, it's unlikely to be suitable because of the compliance and reporting burdens. They're likely to be very cash strapped, and their human resources are going to be very, very, very thin. So this is something to keep in mind if this topic is ever brought up.
I'll just add that from a tax perspective, benefit corps are basically the same as a C corp that is subject to no tax.
Yep. In other words, there are no other special tax benefits for opting into either B Corp or benefit corporation. All right, moving on to next slide. So
Josh, I'm just going to interrupt for a second to give our second CLE code of climate. So the second CLE code is climate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Matt. The next question that you'll be asked or you'll need to think about is, what are the actual steps to forming an entity? And this is where we as lawyers can provide real value to our clients, because this is something we do every day. At least it's something I do every day. Organizational documents and filing requirements. This is my day-to-day job. So assuming that you're familiar with drafting organizational documents and filing requirements, just wanted to give you a very high-level overview of each entity type and what kind of paperwork is involved for each entity type. For general partnership, there's no special paperwork required. If your client is already conducting business with a partner or partners, they're already considered general partnership. We should consider highly recommending them, writing something into, putting something in place, such as a partnership agreement, or actually forming an LLC or corporation, because general partnership as is, they're exposed to a lot of financial liabilities and LLCs and corporations would provide some limited liability protections. LLC, obviously they would need an LLC agreement, and you would need to prepare and file certificate of formation. Usually we file this in Delaware just because Delaware, as you may already know, is they're very experienced, and they have a lot of case law regarding corporate law. For corporations, you need to help them with drafting bylaws and preparing and filing articles of incorporation with the state of formation. I'm just going to go with Delaware because that's the most common example. For nonprofit corporation, in addition to bylaws and articles or certificate of incorporation, you'll also need to include special provisions in the certificate of incorporation for tax exempt status. And these special provisions include a statement of purpose that meets the IRS requirement, such as charitable, educational. I'm going to go into a little more detail in the next slide. A provision regarding non-qualifying activities, such as political activities. And finally, a dissolution provision dedicating the corporation's assets to another similar nonprofit organization or government upon dissolution. For Form 1023, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Insung.
So for nonprofit organizations, they need to file a 1023 application to the IRS. It used to be that we had to file this via mail, but now you can submit the application online, pay.gov website. There are generally two forms. 1023-EZ is the more streamlined form, and generally speaking, among other requirements, the organization expects 50K or less of gross receipts for the next 3 years, and the fair market value of the assets are expected to be 250K or less. And 1023 is any other organization other than 1023-EZ qualified organizations go through the more rigorous process of 1023. And I think I just saw a question on this. Is there any harm do they file the 1023 before the organization documents? So after you form the entity first, and then you submit the 1023 after that, you can make the application retroactive up to, I think it was 27 months. So you basically have 27 months from the date of formation to finalize the 1023, submit, and then you'll get a retroactive application to the date of the date that you're applying for.
And so a question for you, I think it would be helpful for the audience. Is there, where can we find like a questionnaire that we can ask to the client just to assess whether or not their purposes really meet the IRS requirements?
So I think there are two components to that question, actually. So first, in order to basically get a checklist of the information that you need from the client, go to the pay.gov website, sign up, and there is a PDF that has all the questions of Form 1023. You just take out all the questions from there that are applicable to your client. Note that there are schedules at the back that are applicable to very specific clients like medical organizations, educational organizations, religious organizations. But if you don't fall under those categories, generally it will be the first few pages. Based on that, you can extract the questions that you should be asking the clients, which I think is the most efficient way to do it. And the other component of that question is, I think, regarding the charitable purpose itself, which is more of a facts and circumstances exercise. You do need to understand what the client is really planning on doing. And I will get into the details of that later when we talk about the tax implications.
All right, moving on to the next slide. So here are some examples of language that you would need to include in a nonprofit corporation's charter that you wouldn't otherwise see in a traditional for-profit corporation's charter. So the highlighted language, this makes reference to the 501c3 of the IRC code. And here you see the examples, the categories of purposes: charitable, educational, religious, scientific, literary. And I thought it was interesting, and Insung can provide more insight later, that just because your client may be conducting some business or selling some items that's related to ESG, it doesn't necessarily automatically qualify it as one of these for these purposes. So once again, you really need to walk through the facts and circumstances with the client.
Yeah, one thing I should note is this is more of a boilerplate language, and a lot of times you will insert language that is very specific to that organization, respect to their charitable purpose. And the charitable purpose is really what you're writing to the IRS to say we qualify for this status. So we take a lot of time figuring out what the client is really doing. And based on that, we draft the language as precisely as possible so that it captures the intent and still falls under the rules that are applicable to charitable organizations.
Okay, next slide. Here's another example language where we're talking about prohibited activities. I'm not going to read everything through here, but just note that, additional block of text for nonprofit you'll need to consider. Next slide is about the provision that's about distributing assets upon dissolution. So distribute all of the remaining assets of the corporation to another 501c or government. Another block of text that you'll need to consider adding. Okay, so now you have formed the entity. The work is not done yet. There are some additional paperwork post-formation. Two of the main ones are applying for EIN and applying for foreign qualification. For EIN is an acronym for Employer Identification Number. This can be easily applied for on the IRS website. In addition to tax filing purposes, it's needed for opening bank accounts and hiring employees. EIN is basically a social security number for legal entities, so it's going to need it to conduct business. If you are applying the EIN on behalf of the client, just make sure that you fill out a form called SS4. That's basically a form that authorizes you as a third party to apply for the EIN on behalf of your client. Foreign qualification, it's just another word for registering to do business in a state that's not your state of formation. So for example, let's say you are formed in Delaware and you are based in New York, you want to conduct business in New York. Then you would need to apply for foreign qualification to do business in New York. And obviously this is foreign from New York's perspective. The requirements vary by state. So you will need to check with your paralegal or your vendor or just go to state's website to go through the requirements and make sure you have all the necessary information from your client to help them qualify to do business in that jurisdiction. For example, in New York, there's LLCs have publication requirements. So if you are a Delaware LLC trying to do business in New York, you need to go through a publication that's gonna publish the fact that you're authorized to do business in in New York, that's going to go through a local newspaper. That process can take another few weeks. So just another timing component that you want to keep in mind. You should also remind your client that they will be responsible for annual fees from both the state of formation as well as in each of the state that they're qualified to do business.
Josh, I think there's one question from Catherine on this point. She's asking, is there any harm to recommending the formation and the state of operation to avoid fees of both Delaware and the state that they operate in?
Is there any? That's a good question. So, I mean, there's no harm per se. It's just that you will most likely be, I mean, I'm most familiar with the formation in Delaware because that's just where most companies go to form entities. So that's something I would recommend. And there are many reasons. Delaware is just fast. They're fast at processing paperwork, returning filing evidence. And if your client later needs to convert their entity from LLC or corporation to LLC, I think it's just much easier and commercial to do so in Delaware. So just to sum up, there's no harm for this client to form an entity in New York because they'll be operating in New York. But from paperwork perspective, it might be less cumbersome if they do Delaware and then do state that they're operating in.
Yeah, just to add to that, I do have one experience with a nonprofit that originally was incorporated in New York, and it wanted to redomesticate to Delaware. And ultimately, because of the fees associated with merging one entity into the other, we decided to liquidate the New York entity and just form a new one in Delaware. And the New York liquidation process was extremely cumbersome. I believe it was like a 12 to 14 step process. It was definitely not fun. So I think from that, even from perspective of general flexibility and timing, Delaware generally has more superior laws.
And I see another question. What's the general criteria? What are the criteria for determining if you need to register to business in a state? I think I can't recall anything top of my head, but basically if you have an employee or you're based in New York, for example, you're selling products in New York, you would obviously need to register to business in New York. So I think that's kind of the nexus. Are you making revenue in that state or have employees and paying taxes in that state? I see another question. What nexus do you need to Delaware to be operating? So I think I received a question. I think it's asking basically, let me know if I'm interpreting this wrong, but if it's a Delaware corporation, do you need what kind of, so I think this is basically the same question as the one before. Yeah, okay. Sorry, okay. If you have any other questions that's corporate related, feel free to keep sending it to us. Otherwise, we'll move on to tax considerations.
Okay, so everybody's favorite topic, tax, right? Next slide, please. So income tax from a federal perspective, I noted earlier that they're generally pass-through entities and a C corporation. So I'll briefly describe how they're different. So disregard entities, you have one owner, and in the eyes of the IRS, you are literally disregarded. You don't exist. But when you form an LLC and you're the sole owner, you at least get the liability protection, and any income or loss that you generate, you just put it on a Schedule C and attach to your personal income tax return. For partnerships, you need 2 or more people. Also on a flow-through basis, you do have to file an entity level tax return. And the entity itself has to issue what is called K1s to their partners, which reflects the income that is allocated to each partner. And then S corporations are sort of like a hybrid entity. They are on a pass-through basis for tax purposes, but they're eligible to use certain C corporations tax laws that could be beneficial. They are generally subject to more requirements, among them being you can only have up to 100 shareholders generally, and only US persons are allowed to hold S corps, can have 2 classes of stock. There are certain other requirements that need to be met. And as a result of these different types of requirements for S corps, a lot of times in M&A deals, we see S corps that purported to be S corps for a long time, and then turns out they're not, and we end up having to restructure the S corp to buy something that is not an S corp. So there are some complexities, compliance complexities that come with forming an S corp. But I'll get into why S corps can be advantageous in certain situations. C corporations are subject to double tax, as I noted before. So what are the rate differences? C corps are generally subject to 21%. So they are subject to 21% corporate level tax, and any distribution from the C corp out of its earnings and profits is subject to at the highest marginal, the highest rate that is applicable to individuals, 23.8% to the shareholders, which effectively turns out to be around 40% tax. And the 23.8% is assuming qualified dividends, which a lot of people are can generally satisfy easily. Pass-through entities, disregard entities, partnerships, S corps, at the highest rate, at the individual rate, they're subject to 37% tax. That being said, there's this law called 199A, 20% deduction that could be applicable to certain businesses that could bring down income that is eligible for such deduction from 37 to 29.6%. But 199A is pretty complicated, has a lot of limitations, and that are based on income, wages, and assets and other factors. And it's also currently set to expire soon in 2026, unless extended by Congress. So TBD whether this 20% deduction will continue to be available. So pros and cons of using each entity. Why use a C corporation despite generally being subject to higher level of tax? In the context of green businesses that you might face, some of them might be for-profit, some of them might be nonprofit or claims to be a nonprofit. And in case of such businesses that are expecting to raise capital through angel investments, venture capital, or otherwise, because such investors generally prefer to invest through a C corp to avoid paying taxes on the company's profits on a pass-through basis. C corporation is preferred by such investors, and if a business is generally expecting to go down that route, I sometimes see such entities starting out as a C corp, despite the double tax leakage. And frankly, a lot of times such entities are not profitable in the first instance. So the double taxation doesn't really matter, at least at that point. Compliance is relatively more straightforward compared to partnerships as well. So why use a disregard entity or a partnership? So any other type of businesses that are not expected to receive substantial amount of investments in the near or foreseeable future, people start off as a pass-through entity. It generally makes more sense because of the lower rate that is applicable. It's easier to operate in a sense, because, especially for district entities. If you start to have 2 or more partners, the relatively high compliance burden that I noted before applies to such partnerships. One factor that you need to consider when whether to use partnerships or S corps is that partners cannot be employees. So you can't reduce what is called SICA, self-employment tax, whereas S corps actually have the route to reduce such taxes. So I'm actually moving on to S corps. S corps, despite being relatively more complicated in terms of compliance and other burdens that you have to consider as you develop your business, if you are actually profitable and you are expecting some form of profit being generated to be distributed to you, in that instance, S corps, by conducting a reasonable compensation study, they can save on a portion of the self-employment tax, because if they are able to lower the amount that is being given as an employee and get the other portion of the amounts out as dividends, then the dividends are not subject to self-employment tax. It's just the portion that you're receiving as employee that is subject to self-employment tax, which is 15.3%. So it's not a small amount of money. But generally speaking, you should consider using S corps for that purpose when you start to actually have enough income to justify that planning. So that is a general overview of different types of entities for for-profit organizations. For nonprofits, as I noted earlier, generally as public charities or private foundations. And public charities, they're not subject to tax, and all contributions that are made to public charities are deductible. Whereas private foundations, they can be tax-free subject to certain requirements, and only up to a portion of the contribution is deductible at a very high level, up to 30% of the adjusted gross income of the person contributing the money. And both public charities and private foundations are subject to what is called unrelated business taxable income if they engage in activities that are outside of their charitable purpose and start generating income that is really more commercial in nature. For instance, if you're a soup kitchen and you're helping people out, on the side, if you start selling computers, that's definitely going to be a UBTI, and you're going to be subject to tax on that income. And if that becomes more substantial than your actual charitable activity, then you could lose your tax exempt status. One thing I should note for these considerations of different types of entities and in both for-profit and nonprofit setting is in the green pro bono context, not all green clients are going to qualify as a nonprofit. And frankly, a lot of times they could be very for-profit, like they could be monetizing something. It could be based on, selling goods or services. And I'm not saying selling goods or services are necessarily not charitable. They could be, but it really depends on the facts. And I've seen clients that thought they were going to qualify as a nonprofit, but really when we drill down the facts, turns out even though they are doing something good for the world as green organization, it wasn't sufficient enough to be treated as a charitable purpose. So that organization ended up just going the for-profit route. So the lesson from that is you do need to consider in detail what the client is going to be doing, and especially if they're interested in going down the nonprofit route, you need to seriously consider how they're going to be generating their income, how they're going to spend it, how and whether they are competing with any commercial ventures, and really the nonprofit status is there to benefit as a competitive edge against such commercial ventures. There are a lot of other variety of factors that you need to consider, but those are the types of considerations that go into whether the organization will really be a for-profit or nonprofit. And and I guess I skipped over sales tax and employment tax. Sales tax, you just got to pay for tangible real property, and there's other categories that have developed over time, but basically the very high level test is whether you have nexus in a certain state, and you just got to pay it up. So and not registering and not paying can be very detrimental from a penalties perspective. So something to keep in mind. Employment tax, I briefly mentioned CPA, and if you're a regular employer, then there will be FICA considerations, just like all of us as W-2 employees. We are paying up half of it, and our employer is paying half of it. But for CPA, you do have to pay all of it, other than the advantage that S Corps have that I described earlier. Sorry to be jumping around a little bit. Nonprofits, compliance considerations. So they file, after filing the 1023 and after getting your charitable or nonprofit status, you do have to file Form 990. There are different types of Form 990s that are applicable depending on the amount of gross receipts that you're generating. 50K or less, there's literally a postcard that you have to file. It's very small. Otherwise, it's 990 or 990-EZ, and you should definitely obtain an accountant to file those tax returns of nonprofits.
A question for you, Insung. Do states have their own nonprofit tax filing requirements for tax exempt status?
So at least based on my experience so far, I haven't encountered a state that requires a separate 1023 equivalent application, but you do have to register as a charity with the state, and you attach the 1023 application. I believe it was 1023 application that has been submitted. I think that was sufficient to start the activity, but that depends on the state.
Got it.
I should note that all of these considerations are federal, and states vary, and certain states don't recognize, for instance, an S corporation status as a pass-through entity. I believe New York is from one such state. So sometimes you do have to take into consideration where you're operating, where you're setting it up, and decide your entity status based on such state tax considerations as well.
So my takeaway from this slide as a corporate attorney is that always get a tax attorney involved when you're forming an entity, because what's seemingly simple fact pattern or seemingly a simple request from client can quickly evolve into something really complicated, especially if they're considering nonprofit options. I'm gonna open it up to audience for questions and the panelists for any other discussions. We did get a question from the audience, so we'll go through it in the meantime.
Yeah, so the question is, if the organization plans on pursuing both nonprofit activities and for-profit, would you recommend having them form two affiliated entities to avoid the for-profit activities impacting the nonprofit classification? So nonprofits, I believe, are able to form for-profit subsidiaries. It's just that when you have that, you'll be subject to full tax. And but honestly, I haven't had that experience before, but I just know that that is possible.
Right, and I think the famous example is the recently the headline there was a OpenAI. I think their head, the top organization is nonprofit, but the organization subsidiary that's responsible for ChatGPT is for profit.
Okay, another question. What were some of the compliance considerations around nonprofits that you mentioned? So really it's Form 990. It's just another tax return. You file it just like your 1040 for your individual self, 1120 for C Corps, 1120S for S Corps. For nonprofits, they file Form 990 on an annual basis.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for your attention. Matt, I'm gonna hand it over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Josh. We will give our next CLE code right now, which is green. The next CLE code is green. And we're going to take a minute now before we get into our next presentations to talk about, experiences with other climate pro bono in the corporate space. And so the piece there that we need to focus on is that there are lots of different things that could come up in the corporate space. We've covered corporate formation right here, but there are all different kinds of commercial agreements that companies and nonprofits need to get started. And a lot of times these are pretty common sense agreements. Agreements are intended to write down and put in writing what the parties actually agree to. So, you'll see non-disclosure agreements. The code was green. Yes, the CLE code was green, the color green. Thank you so much for following up on that in the chat. And so, I know I've handled, different pro bono assignments involving non-disclosure agreements, confidentiality agreements, which most lawyers have dealt with in some capacity or another. And it just goes to show, how broad, how basic the needs of these climate causes and nonprofit startups are. So non-disclosure agreements, memorandum of understanding, general agreements. I had a conference, a nonprofit sustainability conference that we put together a speaker agreement for, right? These kinds of everyday agreements to get what the companies need done. And they're easier to do, right? There are a lot of templates online, but it's just having that legal mindset and being willing to put pen to paper on behalf of these organizations. It looks like we got another question. Did you guys answer the question? If the organization provides consulting services that are fully virtual and domestic to Delaware, what recommendations do you have for foreign registration? Engagement is anticipated from residents of any and all states, territories, etc.
I think here you could just get away with Delaware, because if you're virtual and domestic and if you're based in Delaware, and if you're not like targeting any specific state, probably, I mean, you wouldn't want to go around all 50 states and start registering. That would be very expensive and not encouraged. So, but I guess if you begin to make a lot of money from a certain state, for example, New Jersey, then I think you may want to start considering registering to business in New Jersey, because you'll be subject to various taxes there?
Yeah. So state taxes are based on an apportionment principle, and I believe there is a threshold amount, but they tend to be pretty low. So once you cross that threshold and you have a lot of clients or people that are being provided services in a certain state, then you will be subject to tax in that state. So from a tax perspective, and I'm not a state tax expert, so I actually don't know how the registration process itself works, but I would think there's probably a registration that needs to be done in order to comply with the state tax requirements as well.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Josh and Insung, are there any, experiences that you can share, activities you've been involved in, corporate formation or otherwise, just to give the audience a sense of what lawyers who are engaged in this practice are finding working with Green Pro Bono?
That's a broad question. I think so. We recently held a clinic with Green Pro Bono. Just speaking out of that experience, a lot of clients came, and we had countered. It was opposite to my initial impression. We actually had pretty sophisticated clients. For example, Stephanie, I'm plugging for a Green Pro Bono, by the way. We had pretty sophisticated clients. They're based in a foreign jurisdiction, but they were looking for a JV in the U.S. or they just wanted to kind of think about expanding into U.S. So for them, I guess like formation from scratch was less of a concern rather than just kind of finding what is really appropriate for them to continue conducting business and expanding in US. So I think it really varies by client, but that just goes to say, I think that the diversity in the client profile that Green Pro Bono has.
Yeah, I think Josh and I might be thinking about the same client, but there was a cross-border component in for-profit versus nonprofit considerations, and certain goods that are being very good work that is being done overseas to fight climate change. And as a part of the initiative, they were seeking a JD partner in the US to continue that really good work. And the conclusion there was, I believe it was about a year ago, but I think we landed at the conclusion that for a nonprofit is not suitable for that purpose, and to just regardless of the potential nonprofit status that they had in that foreign jurisdiction. And from that perspective, we decided that, well, at least we advise that it's better from a US tax perspective to just go the for-profit route. But that was a pretty sophisticated client that was expecting a lot of different types of funding, and one of them was the US. So that was a good experience.
That sounds like a really fantastic project. Go ahead, Josh.
And I think on the flip side, like, an entity could be a nonprofit in that country, but not here, and vice versa. They may not be a nonprofit there, but they could qualify here. So again, discussion with client and the facts and circumstances analysis would be key.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is one of the areas where, Leonard in his original talk was talking about, think of the reasons why you're getting involved, because I think this specific subject matter is a reason why you can help any cause that you want, right? Like Green Pro Bono sent around a posting yesterday or the day before for an organization that's involved in climate art installations and climate art collaborations. And I love art. So I was like, I'm taking that project. It's a simple corporate action, but it's going to give me the opportunity to engage with a company that is going to feed something that I'm very excited about. So, you know, it really, as I said, shows the breadth and depth and that you can reflect on what drives you to get involved in climate and find projects that match that. All right, Stephanie, did you want to add something before we shift it over to the next phase?
No, I mean, I could briefly just say that I think what Josh and Insung pointed out is also important to understand for Green Pro Bono's distributions. There's kind of something for everyone on every level of attorney. So we do have a large contingency of clients who are startups who are very, very early on, and they're needing this early stage advice that Josh talked about in the beginning with, you know, really not even knowing what type of entity they need to form. Then when we get into more, often we see it more with nonprofits, but there's a lot of more complex questions that come along as the businesses go from sort of the growth stage or from the initial stage of becoming a business through their growth and maintaining operations. So you can always see something different with the entity formation requests we send out and the general corporate requests.
Yeah, that's a great point, Stephanie. Thank you. Thank you so much. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and we're going to talk about regulations, because regulations are how things happen, right? They govern what companies can do, what they can't do. And there are lots of instances that I've seen in my journey through Climate Pro Bono of companies needing to understand how regulations apply to certain climate activities, nonprofits trying to understand what they can do. And so the question is, how does climate get regulated? How do we look at regulations and how do we change regulations? So we're going to talk both about, you know, regulations, how to interpret them, how to look at them, and then also, you know, at more advocacy, policy advocacy, which is something that may not come through sort of pro bono channels the same way. But if you're in your community networking with, you know, local nonprofits, advocacy is something you will get asked about a lot as a lawyer. So with that, Michael Showalter is going to talk with handle the next aspect of the presentation. He is a very experienced environmental litigator with ArentFox Shift out of Chicago. And so we're very excited to have Michael here for this presentation.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. And are my slides showing?
Not yet.
Okay. And is it, sorry, Matthew, is it, are you guys going to push them up or should I?
Either way you would like. I have them handy, but it's easiest, I think, if you put them up.
Go for it. You go for it.
Okay.
So hi, everybody. My name is Mike Showalter. I am an environmental litigator, generally practicing in Chicago and New York and kind of elsewhere. In my day job, I handle kind of three kinds of cases. One are cleanup cases. We do a lot of them. They tend to cause a lot of litigations. Two, we help people build stuff. And stuff could be anything from a factory to a pipeline to a wind farm. Some of those are clearly in the green space. Wind farms and solar farms clearly are. We've worked on projects involving carbon capture sequestration, which is there. And then the third thing that I've done throughout my practice is lobbying and regulatory advocacy. So that involves either working with folks in state or federal legislatures or regulators into helping craft and shape policy. So welcome, excited to be here with you guys. I think this is a wonderful program to get people involved in the space. So next slide. This is one of my favorite slides to talk about. And here, I think for this audience, Lisa is somebody working for an NGO telling a business, you know, drop dead. The world is not how I want it, and therefore you must go away. Where we are right now in the regulatory space is sort of at a pretty dynamic time. Without going back to kind of the start of American regulatory law in the 1930s, until about 2008, we had a system in which Congress passed laws and the regulatory apparatus kind of did their best to implement them, and the courts mostly stayed out of the way. I don't know if any of you guys are Supreme Court people, but the Loper Bright case, which is involving Chevron deference, was up this morning, and it's a dynamic time because where we are now is someplace different, in which the world and the regulatory space has become much more multipolar. We have a Congress which has become increasingly ineffective at doing anything other than pass legislation involved spending, which I think it has done generationally great efforts in the clean energy space. But otherwise, sort of the core environmental statutes, Congress has basically given up on. The courts are becoming increasingly strident, and we are seeing them wade in and say, hey, if you're trying to do, regulator, something new with an old statute, you need some level of clear authority that we don't think exists, because if there was clear authority, you as an agency would have already done it. And the world's become pretty mixed up. You have companies now that are becoming B Corps and, possessed with reporting on ESG, and it's causing them to behave in a way which is sometimes way to the left or way environmentally protective of even the government. We have NGOs, we have individual people. The Biden administration has done a remarkable job in trying to modernize sort of the commenting apparatus so that more people feel connected and invested in the government. I think it's a hard challenge, but I think people like you are going to have a great hand in helping to shape this. But right now where we are, it's a challenging time too, because the environmental issues that we have sort of set aside for a long time, with some people knowing they're out there, we all talk about them and we think about them, and they include, climate change and environmental justice. And I think increasingly related to all these things, I think that we are going to see a focus on plastics, and a lot of people from a lot of different sides are going to be interested. So next slide. So here's the elephant of the room, kind of as we kind of wrap up the big picture part of this presentation. The elephant in the room is in the past 5 years, particularly, we've seen the federal government pass generational levels of funding that support clean energy. And we have seen state regulatory commissions kind of weigh in and demand the utilities in many places, not red states or blue states, but all states, commit to funding renewable things. And the elephant in the room in the green energy space is how long that's going to last, and how are the proceeds, the economic proceeds from that, going to be distributed amongst companies, and how are they going to benefit different levels of communities. I live in downtown Chicago, and right now, except if it rained, I could go to the river outside my apartment building and go swimming. And it's a bulkheaded river, so maybe not the safest place because I couldn't get out. But we've seen in 5 decades of the major environmental statutes, we've seen the world change in urban environments and rich communities. And there's an intellectual construct that the reason we can is because lawyers and advocates and wealthy communities are much better at influencing the regulatory process in all manner of ways. And the elephant in the room is the Biden administration has tried to stand up some NGOs and help them along and make the process for commenting and participating in regulations, which, as Matthew said a bit ago, really determine almost everything about our world. It's tried to open the door for it, but how that's going to work, we still don't know. So let's go into some substance and move to the next slide. So basics. When you're faced, the problems that people are going to have on green projects, more often than not, are going to be dealt with through guidance materials. And if you, as a person who exists in the legal world, can't find the guidance materials, and it's a problem that's been sort of provided for in regulations, there's generally going to be a contact that you can find at a local, state, or federal regulator who can help you answer a lot of the problems. You know, beyond that, there are resources like some of the green pro bono organizations have additional resources. And a lot of what you are going to do here in this space are interpret regulations and help people find resources that apply to their stories. So the proglamina for that is talk to the client, understand what they want, and then try to figure out how the regulations apply, doing, you know, using existence guidance materials and help from the agencies. The key for that is you don't want to go out on a limb. You know, if you're advocating for a change and you're providing comments to an agency, there's not a whole lot of limbs for you to go out on. I don't know how many of you regularly look at comments filed in the Federal Register or on things that had been in the Federal Register and pick through a docket. But there's a lot of comments from a lot of people that are not meaningful and not therefore addressed by the agency. And something that we as a legal community can do, it's help people who have a real commitment to environmental issues of their communities or their concerns, articulate their concerns about regulations for the government. That's something we can do. And there's not a whole lot of limb out there to go on. You know, a more confounding thing is you have a company that's a startup and it has a new product that's being formulated and it's got a bunch of ingredients and they're trying to figure out, you know, how they can market it. You know, that's a somewhat more challenging thing. An even more challenging thing is they have a product that would say regulate pests. And now you're starting to look with a new formulation. It may be, you know, a startup business, say it may be somebody who comes across your deck, but they've got questions that involve FIFRA interpretation and they're going to market, and they have sort of things that if you violate, you could have a significant regulatory sanction or even a criminal violation. You know, you just need to be aware of there's limitations on what we're all doing and what understanding when you provide advice, what the downside risk is to the client for a regulatory interpretation. If there's a big regulatory interpretation, you just need to make sure that you're situated right to provide that advice. Not saying don't do it. I'm just saying be judicious. So, okay, let's next slide. Where we go from here. This is kind of constitutional and regulatory law basics 101. We've got a hierarchy of authorities, and the differing levels of authority determine what you can do. If you're trying to solve a regulatory question, generally you're going to look at guidance materials first. And if they don't give you an answer that you like or that's suitable for the client, the next thing is say, hey, are these guidance materials consistent with the regulations? And if they aren't, then, you know, that's going to start you down a process of working with the agency to either get an interpretation or to get the guidance materials changed. Or it's going to say, hey, do I need to challenge this regulation itself? Next process, you know, you got a regulation you don't like or don't understand. You know, there's different things that you can do in that space. You can seek a technical, kind of a formal technical interpretation from an agency, or you could go and petition for rulemaking. A lot of NGOs now are pretty engaged in the petitioning process, in which they see a regulation, they don't like what it says, they see a real concern that's not addressed. And most of the federal environmental statutes provide processes in which you can say, hey, agency, this needs to be changed to better address this concern. And this is something that a lot of folks are doing. It is a place that the statutory regime exists to let people do it. And, you know, the agencies do it. Oftentimes too slow in my perspective, but that's something you can do, and it's a place to be engaged with. You know, obviously, beyond regulations, we have statutes, and there are ways that people can write. You can write to congressmen and petition for changes. And, you know, if you can find a champion in a federal or more likely a state legislature for something, you can get real things done. And we have seen big changes that came from the grassroots happening in places all over the country. And, you know, that's something that's possible and important. You know, the key for statutes then, of course, is going to be they've got to be consistent with the relevant constitutions. And that's a whole other litigation process entirely. It's a fascinating thing to do if you want to do it. But those challenging state and federal statutes is a super fun thing to do. It's been a great hobby for me over the years, and I've done it a lot in the pro bono space, so there's opportunities to do it. But as I said below, the level of authority kind of determines what you can do. So next slide. I'm sorry to talk so fast, but I know I'm on a tight time frame. What's possible here in the regulatory land, we kind of talked about this. The early work, I think, in the green pro bono space is probably going to be with startups and setting up organizations, and that's a thing. But beyond that, I think really where we're existing right now, regulatory status in America is there's a whole lot of demand for policy changes for real and valid reasons, doing with the unhealthy state of our environment. And a lot of people have these concerns, but what they don't have are people to help them effectively translate and advocate and deploy their viewpoints in ways that can help influence the government. Communicating with anyone about risk is a fraught topic. And if you talk to somebody about whether using a plastic cutting board can affect your health, it's challenging. But then when you take somebody who already has those concerns, and they may be real and valid, and there are scientific studies that support that, and try to figure out how to deploy them in policy advocacy, it takes people like you that can take these impulses and figure out whether they can be ground truthed and resourced and figured out and thought through, and then how to deploy them. And I just want to commend everybody for being here and being willing to kind of engage in this process. Right now, we're existing at a time where a lot of people have lost faith in government. And part of the reason is that we have this power structure that people don't think you can change statutes, and people don't think that regulators look at communities like theirs and care. And it may be that they do care, but they can't hear what people are saying. And it takes people like us to look and listen and talk and try. And these are things that a lot of lawyers in the pro bono space have done for a long time in civil rights areas, and criminal justice areas, and immigration areas. But if people like us come into the environmental space and do the same thing, we can really do, we've got an opportunity here to help make the world better using our skill sets and our passions too. And that's important. What else can you do? What's possible? I think something that everybody can do is try to make yourself more aware of what policies the government is pursuing in the environmental space. There are yearly agendas which are published, and you can look at them and figure out policies that you're interested in. And, there's some level of policy entrepreneurialism, where if you can find an issue that drives you, sometimes it can go both ways. You find people who have concerns that share your concerns, and you can do some good. Beyond that, the other thing here is we are at a sort of seminal, pivotal time where we have a lot of young and energetic people who are committed to driving policy change. And, we're at a place where we can help really do some good. And we're kind of only limited by our imaginations and, our time. So one more slide. What's left? I'm happy to talk about this. I love talking about environmental stuff. I regularly write a lot about environmental stuff. The QR code here, if you take a picture of it, you can see a link to sort of an abbreviated version of my bio. And then my writing is broken out in different topics, some of which involve what I talked about here, which is regulatory interpretation. Always happy to talk, always excited to meet new people. Thank you for spending some time with me today, and I will pass this back to Matthew.
Thanks so much, Michael. We did get a question
Yes.
are there any lobbying registration requirements that lawyers and clients should be aware of? And go ahead.
You go. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, please go.
Lobbying registration is a thing. If you are lobbying the sort of at the federal level, and there's all kinds of different states and different requirements, generally, if you're not being compensated for something, if you're doing it pro bono, you're allowed to lobby for free. That is not ironclad advice. I don't want to provide lobbying advice today. I at times have been a registered lobbyist, both at the federal and state level. And even when you do that, and I understand the contours of what you can do, that's an area that you really want to dig into, because everybody's trying to do this on the up and up. And it's an area where you don't want to wade in and have concerns. But generally, if you're not doing something for money, you are allowed to not register.
Yes, absolutely. And I know that most states have, very good resources. My practice is headquartered in New Jersey. A lot of my pro bono work is in New Jersey, and New Jersey's rules are exactly what Michael just said, that you can lobby as long as you're not being paid for it, without registering. But there is a broad definition of what it means to be paid for it. It's receiving a benefit. So like, if I was expecting to be paid by, let's say I'm representing, an environmental startup, and they say, we're not going to pay you for the lobbying, but we'll pay you for other stuff. And that's a scenario where, at least in New Jersey, you might still be considered a lobbyist. Now, the other thing I'll mention about New Jersey's rules are, in New Jersey, you have to be lobbying a quote unquote senior elected official in order to be considered a lobbyist, or doing grassroots lobbying intended to reach a senior elected official. So for instance, in the regulatory space, I can talk with a staffer at an agency as much as I want and try to influence legislation, and that will not trigger a registration requirement. But if I go to my state senator and tell them, as on behalf of to do something, that is lobbying. Now, there's still the, do I have to register as a lobbyist for it? But it's important to know that there's both, there's multiple thresholds usually. Are you being paid, and is the person you're talking to a covered person? And that may be different in other states. I'm just talking from my experience in New Jersey.
Illinois, I think it's relatively similar, though, even at lower levels. Once a regulation has been proposed, there's sort of your contacts with certain covered people are logged, and they start to appear on dockets. So if you're, engaged in a citing proceeding, and at some point there's litigation and you're communicating about things, you'll start to see contacts showed up, attorney for developer, talk to this person. So it's a complex and evolving area. It's something that can be managed. And, I don't think Matthew or I are saying, don't do this. I think it's important that we do this. And it's just something we all need to work out, how to do the right thing by the government's laws about lobbying and comply with it. Don't be dissuaded or discouraged. Do the right thing and try to help people, and it tends to work out.
Exactly. There's usually a way to do it without registering, whether that's putting some kind of buffer between you, not being paid, or lobbying a different person who's not protected. But, thank you so much, Michael. People have questions, please keep filling them out in the Q&A. But we're going to go to our last presentation of the day, which is me. So you're back to me again. And this is going to be very like Michael's presentation, except a practical example, a case study. You'll hear and see a lot of the same things. So if you want to take on a climate pro bono project in this space, one option is to go to Green Pro Bono. The other is to go into your community and find a regulatory problem. And what do I mean by that? So in New Jersey, community gardens are not allowed under existing regulations to compost any vegetables that come from that garden and go home to someone without a very expensive set of permits. That makes it completely cost prohibitive for community gardens to compost in New Jersey, at least fully legally. And that's important because as we scale things, we want them to be fully legal so that funding can be provided. So I was speaking with my community, and some of them mentioned that we have a community garden, we were composting, and we were told to shut down that composting activity because it was illegal, because they could not take a zucchini that was grown at the garden, bring it to the kitchen, peel it, and then bring the peels back and throw them in the compost pile of the community garden. So there I had a regulatory problem, and it was a problem in regulation, because figuring out what is the what is the right level that you're at is one of the steps. So Michael referenced guidance, regulations, statutes, constitutions. The other thing to think about is, who's the applicable regulatory body? Is this something that is regulated by a municipality, by a state, by at the federal level? Which one is it? So I'm going to pause there for a second. The third CLE code was green, and the fourth CLE code is advocacy. The third CLE code was green. The fourth CLE code is advocacy. So you have to figure out what level you're at. What is the right level of this? So in this instance, we were dealing with a state regulation that needed to be changed. And to do that, we had some discussions with the applicable state regulators. I did not need a lobbying license to do that. And as a result of those discussions, we determined that the right thing to do was to file a petition for rulemaking. And Michael referenced this as well. A petition for rulemaking is a formal written request that identifies the regulation that exists and how it needs to be changed. And this is a really important tool for the industry, for people who are trying to make change, because there are usually strict timelines in which the agency must respond to a petition for rulemaking. And so it sets you on a path. So this is one of those decision points. It is important to have communications with agencies that are responsible for interpreting regulations to see what they can do. And that's always the first place that you should go. But if that doesn't work, understand that you can't ask an agency to do something that they don't have authority to do. This is working within the regulatory frameworks, and one of the things that you have to get creative about if you're in advocacy. There are sometimes provisions in regulations or guidance, and this is, again, if something is guidance, then usually the agency can change its decision on it. If something is regulation, the agency has to change a regulation. So you have to understand how to work within the frameworks, and that's both structurally and substantively, because sometimes there are alternative solutions, and a lot of times for these kinds of things, the organizations are willing to brainstorm, the agencies are willing to brainstorm to try to figure out what the answer is and how to go about it. So we filed a petition for rulemaking to change the regulations to allow community composting without the costly permits. That has led to a huge, long period of time of working with important stakeholders and decision makers, working with community gardens, working with everyone who's engaged in the waste and recycling industry in New Jersey, working with the agencies, working with regulators, working with legislators, working with local municipalities, really identifying everyone who is part of these discussions. And that is super critical, because you need influence to make change happen. And you get influence in various different ways. There are some seminal sort of persuasive pieces on this, but they generally go, you need mass, money, media, or meaning to have influence. Mass refers to the number of people involved in something. Getting petitions signed, getting key legislators or mayors or critical politicians behind you, that gives you mass. Money is, how much investment is this? How many dollars, how many businesses? That's less relevant in the climate space, but still relevant. It still is helpful. And then I would say, media is getting media attention, which is very helpful, because that can drive how something happens. That can drive the different ways that companies get involved. And then meaning is something that I think is very important, which is explaining why the action that we're taking, why the cause that we're supporting makes a difference. And this is something that I found, because regulators, people want to do the right thing. And so giving them a story as to why they can do the right thing is important. But that doesn't mean it's going to happen or work. And that's one of the challenges that we ran into. But I want to take a detour before I get to the challenges of, I spoke a lot at the beginning about about making pro bono work for you. I have highlighted this pro bono activity that I've been doing for a lot of different bases, for a lot of different people and reasons, and have received recognition from agencies, from industry groups, have articles written about it, received awards. All of these things helped my career, but also gave me more credibility to go back to the decision makers that I was talking about and let them know I'm someone important that you should listen to, even if I'm talking about community composting endlessly. So it's really important to create feedback loops and to use this as part of your career strategies. But I think the last thing to note is you really can't give up, because this process takes a very, very long time. The petition for rulemaking was not successful in our case, and we've had to switch to legislation to get these changes made legislatively. And so the process has been going on for about 4 years now that we've been working through this. And we are likely to get a change in the next 6 months, but it's taken a very, very long time. And it's important not to give up. These changes, they do happen slowly. As Michael said, people lose faith, but keep the faith. That's what I'm here to tell you. Keep the faith and it will work well for you. So that ends our programming for the day. We are incredibly appreciative. I hope that you will join us tomorrow and see what we have in store for you tomorrow. Also, please, as I said, volunteer with the Green Pro Bono Project, sign up for the Planetary Lawyer Project, and we're really glad to have you here. Thank you all so much and have a nice day.